more, better, faster, stronger, improve, grow. These are all things that we want. We seek it out. We seek out growing, improving, just being better at something or having more of something. But what happens when it's not the case? What happens when things don't go as planned? What happens when growing doesn't occur? Those questions led me to think about wage stagnation because I wasn't aware of it at the start. I didn't think about it because I didn't have to think about it. I was in a position where I didn't need to think about it in the first place. And now I'm in a position where I can think about and observe perspectives that many stakeholders have about wage stagnation because I'm given the opportunity to do so. So who is involved and affected by wage stagnation or just inequality and issues with wages? So you have workers and firms, and then after that, you think about divisions of workers. So workers without a college degree and workers with a college degree. On top of the firms themselves, with suppliers being the main player as the victims of bargaining power as well. So now that we know who's involved, it's time to think about discussing each of them one by one. And we'll start with workers without college degrees. Workers without college degrees feel the most limited by wage stagnation. And the big thing that sticks out is the gap between payments and wages between education levels or levels of attainment in the field of education, where Matthew J. Slaughter, an economist from Dartmouth College, identifies in his 1999 paper about globalization and wages that in the year 1979, there was a difference of 30% between male college-educated workers and male high school-educated workers in their wages, and in 1995, that gap increased to 70% from 30%. That growing gap shows the fast lane that college-educated workers' wages are on, and how high school-educated workers were being left behind in some way, shape, or form. And now there's an opportunity to grow, but is it available to workers without a college degree? Not always. There's a dilemma that I would just call fuel conflicts. And I define it as fuel conflicts wherein the fuel in terms of what it takes to grow and sustain yourself is money, and the coexistence and the same pulling in both ways creates dilemmas, and that the existence of those dilemmas creates unease and the feeling of limitations. If you try to extend and stretch things out, you could break easily, being brittle. And that would be like unexpected occurrences of expenses. And even if we have more of money, we might not even be in a better position in the end. As John D. Wisman, in his 2013 paper, identifies, and John D. Wisman is also a professor at American University in economics, and he points out that we can have materially better off people, but if the share that they get is staying the same, you're still vulnerable to crises. And that crisis was the 2008 financial crisis, which was highlighted in his paper as well. So now that we know about workers without college education, it's time to think about workers with college educations. So there's differences that still exist between workers that have a college education, but it's not on the same level as their growth trajectory being just completely different from college educated workers. There's just differences within a group, and Matthew J. Slaughter defines that in his paper, the same paper, as residual inequality or differences within a group. And an example that is personal to me is just discussion about bonuses at home, whether it be intentional or unintentional, just kind of hearing about it. And it's really just the lack of the dissatisfaction about what you got or what was obtained by my parents in their work, and the difference between expected contribution, the contribution you provided, and what was expected or received. And that residual inequality is just where big earners got big increases and other earners didn't get an increase that matched that growth and created an additional gap between the two, which brings up those feelings of frustration about the bonuses and additional compensation at the end of the year. And there are other ways to obtain income, and you think about the stock market. And John D. Wisman also identifies the development of the stock market and points out how it kind of occurred and how it developed, which really came from investments into that financial space, away from the typical real economy where you think about buying and selling goods. It moved into financial space, and now it is what it is today with your stock exchanges, many big shows about it and all that. And now there's still some issues with it, but it's not really it's just a similarity between the wages of college workers and now the stock market itself, where what you get in is what you can get out or what you can lose. And that matches the ideas behind residual inequalities, where you can improve, but the level of improvement depends on what you invested in the first place. So now that we know about workers, it's time to think about firms. The firms who employ workers in general, in any case, to keep the firm up and running and delegate the responsibilities of the firm itself. And the dynamics between firms when they do perform transactions dictates the level of their views on wage stagnation, and the buyer reliance is a big piece of that. And Nathan Wilmers, a MIT professor, in a 2018 paper highlights Ferris Fashions, which is a firm that was an exclusive supplier for Walmart. And what Walmart did was they put a ton of pressure on them. They just weight on their shoulders, hammering prices down as much as they possibly could. And they could do that because Ferris Fashions had nowhere else to go. They were stuck with Walmart, whether they liked it or not, and the sacrifice to that was the wages of their factory workers, which were identified as being poorly paid positions at that time. And this is a one-sided reliance on the buyer. The buyer doesn't need to rely on the supplier. The buyer can go elsewhere. The supplier doesn't have that privilege to look out for buyers and seek out people like that. They're a reactive and responsive firm, and you can't seek out others the way buyers can with their capital as well. And now we're going to give a figure of 10%. 10%, and Nathan Wilmers also finds that in his 2018 paper, finding that what is responsible for some portion of wage stagnation, the bargaining power of buyers, contributes about 10% to wage stagnation, and that highlights that firms view wages as something that can be cut or expended, just as an expendable resource to get the resources and revenue that they want. So now that we know everything about all these firms, workers, different types of workers, and what they experience, there's a consistent feeling of being somewhat pressured or limited in some way, shape, or form, and those differences are varied across stakeholder groups, with workers without college degrees being impacted the most. And going back to why I'm doing this, I'm now I wasn't aware of wage stagnation, how it affected us, but now I know about what it's like to see different pressures and apply to different angles, forms, fashions, and even just different figures doing the pressuring or being pressured. And now it's time to think about ourselves. Now that we're in the shoes of others, it's time to get our shoes back on ourselves and think about how we influence others and change ourselves. Thank you. And here's the key notes outline. I have it up here. It's flipped, but conclusion. Then I can try flipping the camera, but I won't.